Miami, a place where everyone thinks it's a constant party, but where in reality, there's a massive problem. It's one you can't always see until it swirls into our daily lives.
Sea level rise would seem obvious, the height of the ocean. What we don't see is that over geologic time, sea level varies tremendously, hundreds of feet up and down. But for the last few thousand years, it really hasn't changed. We see the daily movement of tides, high and low tide, and then during a storm, it gets even higher. And now we're seeing this phenomenon of king tides, when the streets flood every 28 days in certain parts of Miami and elsewhere in the world. That's an indication that the base elevation of sea level rise is changing. It's changing because the ice sheets and glaciers in the world are melting because the planet's getting warmer. We don't see that very often, but it's the polar regions, it's the glaciers, Antarctica and Greenland, that will change sea level in our lifetime and certainly in the next few generations. It's going to keep getting higher.
As of 2013, 5.8 million residents live in South Florida, which includes Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Broward counties. 25,000 live in the Florida Keys, but Miami, which hugs the eastern coast of Florida, may be the most vulnerable to sea level rise. Miami's residents live on porous limestone. The sea level will rise up through the limestone that Dade County sits on, as opposed to spilling over from the ocean. Eventually, the foundations of the massive high-rises that sit atop of this limestone will begin to crumble. Homeowners on Key Biscayne are working with rising waters.
Anyway, so a lot of the things we had to do were geared toward that, putting electrical outlets and things like that all had to be at 10 feet and above. The protection of anything below 10 feet needed to have ventilation so the water could flow. If there was any water that went into the garage, for example, the garage is at 5 feet, the garage has to have openings to allow the water to flow out as well as in, to not put pressure on the structure, to kind of let it flow around the structure.
The original natural high ground level was 26 feet. And that's the highest spot on the actual outcrop of limestone rock that Miami is built upon. And that was downtown just south of the Miami River, roughly where the Metro Rail station is at Brickell. So if you want to see how high Miami actually is, that's the place to go look. So what we're doing with the maps is we're putting artificial levels onto that landscape, and you can do it with a graph, but with the maps you can quickly see that at different water levels quite a bit of area change occurs as what's underwater versus what isn't underwater.
Scientists have differing estimates for when South Florida will become uninhabitable, but it will likely begin before seawaters reach the ground surface. As the ground becomes saturated with salt water, the region's infrastructure will likely corrode and fail, making life above ground more expensive and challenging for many residents who will have to eventually move. As of 2010, 5 years after Hurricane Katrina, over 140,000 people had left New Orleans, a drop of 29% from the previous decade. The city's black population fell from 67% to 60%, mostly because the infrastructure that those residents relied upon was severely destroyed and never rebuilt.
One clear example that you can see is Hurricane Katrina, where the people that were affected the most were African American communities, people that lived in poverty. They had nowhere to go. They could not leave their situation. What they had to resort to at the very end was stealing, looting, and most of them lost everything.
But when might Miamians need to migrate? According to some scientists, it will take 12 to 16 inches of sea level rise, which might happen by the year 2122, to cripple Miami-Dade County and South Florida as we know it. At that point, toilets will no longer flush, storm drains will flow backwards. Fresh water will eventually become undrinkable. Already, South Florida officials are trying to slow down the effects of the region's rising seas. As of 2014, the city of Miami Beach has invested over $400 million in technology and equipment to help curb the effects by adding new storm drainage systems and pumps to remove surface water. Still, even the wildest of ideas about how to cope with sea level rise are being taken seriously. In October 2014, South Miami officials revived a proposal to split South Florida from the rest of the state. They were concerned legislators in Tallahassee were ignoring local issues of sea level rise. Supporters of this plan believe the split would bring much needed attention to the southern part of the state and the major problems of sea level rise and climate change.
Dade County will start to resemble a series of islands. And we know what those look like. They're called the Florida Keys. So there will be people living here. They'll be living very much like they do in the Florida Keys. Airports will be a problem because they take up so much land area. It's just a question of who's going to be still here, what the infrastructure is going to look like that allows them to stay there.
It's unclear what major plans will surface as a reality to best address the pending problems of sea level rise. And it's not a matter of if, but when, the party will finally stop.